With the recent addition of the TCP server to the device call list, you can do something really amazing, absolutely geeky, and potentially quite useless. You can remote control a controller. Ta-da! And I brought this XC2 today, which is set up to work with an ATEM switcher. So selecting preview on an ATEM switcher, and you can see on the software, which also connected to the ATEM switcher, how this is working, of course. This is absolutely nothing new. Now, the interesting thing is, I set it up so I could telnet to this controller. So this is the controller's IP and the particular port. If I do that, press list, I'll see a list of a lot of internal registers. And today I would like to work with the HWC. It's short for hardware component, or we sometimes call them hardware interface component. And I can manipulate those on a distance. So first of all, if I type help, then you will see this message, and you can see how we can apparently simulate a trigger on any of these hardware components. Now, I happen to know that this component is number 1. This is number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I think this is 13, this is 11, and so forth. Now, the main point is that I could look these up in the UniSketch interface. I'm not going to do that right now, so take my word for it. This is number 1, this is number 5. And by the way, you can now see it. You saw when I pressed this button, you see that hardware component number 1 changed its status, and hardware component number 5 also changed its status. Now, these numbers will be documented. If you go to SKAARHOJ.com, you'll see documentation for this. So you're absolutely not left in the blind. If you go to support device cores, then you see a list of all our device cores, and you scroll down to the TCP server. And there you can go directly to the manual, which is on GitHub, and you'll be able to understand what the bits in the return code is, what they mean, and how to interpret it if you want. But, well, basically the focus is not so much this level of detail. I just want to introduce you to what this can do. And I claimed this was hardware component number 1. So what I can do is HWC number 1 equals 2, and now I'm gonna just simulate a press, which is a down trigger and an up trigger, and I write press, and what we should see is this becomes green, and also on the ATEM switcher, camera number 1 should come on preview. So I'm now pressing return to my message here, and there you go. I manipulated a press on this button, which of course instructed the ATEM switcher to put camera number 1 on preview. So the absolutely amazing and potentially useless thing is that we could have another SKAARHOJ controller remote controlling this controller, which in turn sends commands to the ATEM switcher. So from the outside, it wouldn't look like something new, because if we took an E21 SLD, for instance, and set it up to do this, it would look like it was also connected to the ATEM switcher, but in fact, it doesn't even know an ATEM switcher is involved. It would be connected to this controller and ask this controller to press a button and return the status of that button to this button. And it just happens to be so that this button is configured to instruct ATEM switches to do something or whatever. So let me see. I have an Ethernet cable here, and I should have PoE. So you'll be able to see this one boot up. Let me just change the camera here so you can see what's happening. Okay, so apparently the device has now booted, and we'll look at the configuration in a second, but let me just show you. When I press this button, you can see how apparently it works in parallel with the controller over here. Even as I pull the slider, you get the same effect as pulling the slider on this controller. And if I operate this controller, it seems like the status is reflected over here. So what I want to do right now is take a look at the configuration of this device. So I have it hooked up with USB to my laptop, and I'll just remove this window so you can get a peek inside the configuration. And we go to the SKAARHOJ firmware application. As always, you see it has recognized the USB modem, something which is the controller, and you simply press open configuration. And that will take us to a online web page where we have the configuration for this one stored. You see the only device core installed on this particular controller turns out to be the UniSketch TCP Client. And if I take one of these buttons as example, press this one, you see this one has the action UniSketch TCP Client tied to remote HWC. So it's tying itself to a remote hardware component on the XC2. And the component number it's tied to is number 1. So here you need to know the numbers over here to link this button to this one and this one to this one and so forth. But that's exactly what I've been doing for those 4 buttons. The cut button likewise, and also the slider. We have the slider right here is linked to hardware interface component number 13. And then I just, as the final thing, need to make sure that the UniSketch TCP client has the correct IP address of this controller set up, and I can save the setting. I can press the check for updates, and voila! The new software is downloaded, installed on this one, and it will connect to this controller and remote control it for whatever reason you might like to do that. As I said, it was kind of geeky, but I think potentially and in the future we'll find some awesome uses for this one.